What's up, Willowbrook? Today we are in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. Now, in our passage today, we read about Jesus clearing out the temple. And before we get into it, I want to make you aware of a debate that's been going on between scholars for a long time. In the book of John, we see that this event takes place at the beginning of his earthly ministry. However, in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this takes place at the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. So the debate is about whether or not this happened multiple times or whether this is just an issue of the placement of this event in the life of Jesus in the different gospels. We're not going to solve any of these problems today, but I just wanted to make you aware so at a later time you could go look into it yourself. Now, as we read this passage, specifically verses 13 through 16 about Jesus clearing out the temple, I think the question that I know I'm asking myself and maybe you're asking yourself is, why did he get so angry? Was this justified? Well, I think there's several things taking place here. I think we have to look at the context, and I think we have to look at the words of Jesus to understand what's going on and why he responded the way he did. Now, every male that was 19 years old and older, every Jewish male rather, that was 19 and older, was required to pay a yearly temple tax. So when these men would come to the temple, they would oftentimes have foreign money with them, and the temple wouldn't receive that money. So what the temple did was they provided a service where they would convert one currency to another currency, that the temple would actually receive. Now, this seemed like a good idea on the surface, except for these money changers that were doing this were adding these very high rates to this conversion process. So rather than just seeing a need and being helpful, they saw a need and they were taking advantage of people. Also, with the animals that we read about in this passage, we have to remember that animals played a major role in the worship that took place in the temple at that time. So if you were going to travel a long distance to the temple and you needed to sacrifice an animal, it would be nearly impossible to keep that animal alive and to keep the animal in a condition that was worthy of sacrifice in the temple. So to solve this, there were people in the temple selling animals. But we see the same thing here that we see with the money changers. The people selling these animals raised the price so high. I read that it was upwards of 18 to 19 times more than the price of the same type of animal outside of the temple. So here we see people taking advantage of those that came to worship God. So that's the context. Let's look at the words of Jesus and again, begin to get a clearer understanding of why he responded the way he did. He says this in verse 16, "To those who sold the doves, he said, 'Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market.'" And I think if we also look at the words of Jesus in the synoptics, it begins to give us a clearer picture as well. For example, Mark 11, verse 17, Jesus says this, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." So what do we do with all this information? This is how I interpret it. Imagine this. Jesus is going to the temple for Passover. He's going to worship the Father. And when he gets there, he sees a lot of other things taking place. He sees the selling of animals. He sees the exchanging of money. He sees people being taken advantage of. It's loud, it's noisy, it's crazy. And all of a sudden he realizes this place that's supposed to be a house of prayer, a house of worship with God at the center has changed. And it's no longer about that. God, who should be in the center, has been replaced with all this other stuff. Now maybe you're wondering, okay, that makes sense, but isn't God supposed to be love? Why did Jesus respond this way? If Jesus is God and God is love, why did Jesus get angry? Well, a couple things. The Bible does say that God is abounding in love, but it also says he's slow to anger, which means he does still get angry. And with Jesus, we have to remember that, yes, he's the Lamb of God, but he's also the Lion of Judah. And when he sees injustices taking place, when he sees God's house that's supposed to be a house of prayer turned into something much, much less, he responds with anger. But that anger is fueled by his love for the Father. So in other words, we see God's love here. We see Jesus' love here expressed through his anger. Now, if this was such a big deal for Jesus, I think it should also be a big deal for us. And it's true, today we don't have a temple that we go to where we worship, but we still do gather for worship. So I think we need to make sure that when we gather, that the center of our worship, what we're focused on when we come together, isn't on something else, but that it stays on God. It's very easy for our focus to become on the music or the message or the building or the social aspect of coming together and gathering. But when we do that, we are really putting ourselves in a bad place. We see Jesus get so angry when he sees this take place, and we need to be mindful that we're not doing the same thing today. See, God is worthy and deserving of being the center of our worship and the center of our lives. So let's be sure we keep him in his proper place. God bless you. Have a great day.